Is Ilia Topuria ducking Arman Tsarukyan, especially after UFC Qatar? Tsarukyan looked unbelievable against Dan Hooker. Decimated him like he was nothing. Topuria was not in the crowd, even though his brother fought that night. Had already left, did not stay for the number one contender to fight that night, knowing the UFC said the winner of the Arman Tsarukyan versus Hooker fight was going to be a number one contender fight. We're going to talk about this matchup. We're going to talk about UFC Qatar. We're going to talk about a bunch of other stuff. And let's get into the UFC Qatar breakdown real quick. Before we get into Topuria versus Tsarukyan, what's going on with all of that. At UFC Qatar, I have 5 big takeaways from it. Arman Tsarukyan smothers Dan Hooker. He's the rightful number one contender. Quite literally beat Dan Hooker in every single way possible. On the feet, landed the more damaging shots, had Hooker hurt on the feet. I saw him stumble a couple of times. And then you go on to the mat where Hooker tried I think Hooker tried to take Arman down. That was a horrible decision. Tried a couple of different front chokes. I don't know if he realizes who Arman Tsarukyan is or forgets what he watched on tape with Arman Tsarukyan. Yes, he can get caught in a guillotine if it's Charles Oliveira, and yet he still gets out of it. Hooker, to be fair, actually jumped some pretty decent guillotines. I can't even lie. He had a good, I think he tried a ninja choke at one point. If not, he tried 2 separate guillotines. One of them actually got him on the mat here, ended up having him in this arm triangle eventually. But Arman did the work to pass the guard, which, by the way, you don't see in high-level grapplers as much anymore. Passing the guard, transitioning, the ground and pound that Arman Tsarukyan does. I've said this on a recent YouTube short or TikTok, that Arman Tsarukyan is the closest thing we have to Khabib when it comes to posturing up, getting control over your opponent, regardless of the position you are on top of them in, on the mat, and implementing the ground and pound. You don't see that in MMA. You don't see that with UFC fighters anymore, but you see that with Arman Tsarukyan. Tsarukyan ends up getting into mount on Dan Hooker, some decent ground and pound, but immediately goes into this arm triangle. Doesn't even pass guard fully, as you see actually on the right side. Hooker was holding Tsarukyan's ankle and foot to make sure he doesn't pass all the way to the half guard. Tsarukyan's squeeze was fantastic. Nonetheless, still got the tap from Hooker. Tsarukyan's the number one contender. There's nobody in lightweight that comes close to Tsarukyan or Ilia Topuria. Oliveira and Holloway, in my opinion, are the close 3 and 4. I don't think anybody else is even remotely near the realm. But the close 3 and 4 in Max Holloway and Charles Oliveira, I feel like there's a substantial gap between them and Topuria and Tsarukyan. At number 2, Ian Gary beats Bilal Muhammad. I'm not saying smothered. I'm not saying dominated, although you can kind of start pushing it towards a dominant victory. He looked quicker. He looked better overall. Bilal was having some decent success on the feet as well. But Gary's oblique kick, by the way, a beautiful, beautiful weapon. I know a lot of people are very disgusted with the oblique kick use. I think the usage of that was unbelievable by Gary. It's an insane weapon that he implemented in this game that kept Bilal a little bit off. I feel like that's one of the most perfect weapons Gary has implemented in his game. I don't really see a better weapon he has in mixed martial arts. In his entire arsenal, I think Ian Gary, his oblique kick is 100% the best thing he has. His boxing's okay. He's pretty quick overall with the hands. Sometimes it looks a little sloppy. It looks a little flimsy. It's a little weird at times. And he is still quick. He is still honestly very, very good. I think Bilal actually fought a lot better than I anticipated. I think it's actually insane how good Bilal is at his age. I think 38 years old, and he looks that good. He's still moving forward. He's still that durable. I think Bilal's still good. I still think he's like a top 7, 8 welterweight right now. But the top end of welterweight, it's ridiculous how good, young, explosive, and just dynamic they all are. And Morales, Pratas, Gary, even Sean Brady, honestly. But Shavkat Rakhmonov, you have Jack Della Maddalena. He's 28 years old. He lost to Makhachev. I get it, but he's still Jack Della Maddalena, 28 years old, number one guy right now in the world. I think welterweight's insanely stacked. Bilal is fantastic. Just not going to be up to par with these younger guys, especially guys who are stylistically rough matchups for him and Ian Gary. Gary looked good overall. He's not worthy of a title shot next. Ian Gary should not be up next for a title shot. He shouldn't even be considered. It should be Michael Morales as the number one guy up if they're not going to do Topuria versus Makhachev. Morales versus Makhachev. You could do Gary versus Shavkat. Depending on whether or not we get Makhachev Topuria, you go from there. But I think if we do not get Makhachev Topuria, you do Makhachev versus Morales, you do Gary versus Pratas for the number one contender. My bad. Gary versus Shavkat, and then Pratas versus maybe JDM, maybe Usman versus JDM. You don't know. But I don't think Usman versus JDM should happen. I think the way to book welterweight right now is exactly as I said it. You do Morales versus Makhachev. You do Ian Gary versus Shavkat 2. You do Um, and that one, you get to have both of those guys on a full camp. And then you do Prates versus JDM. You do Kamaru Usman versus Bilal Muhammad. I think Bilal looked good considering I didn't expect him to do anything in this fight and that Gary was going to be much, much better than him everywhere, which I do believe Gary was. At number 3, Waldo Cortez Acosta is a bad, bad man. The guy comes in, 2 days notice, accepts the fight. After fighting 20 days ago, getting poked in the eye by Ante Delija, a very big story coming off of the Aspinall eye poke, where Aspinall ends up quitting the fight in the first round. Instead, Waldo Cortez Acosta gets eye poked badly, eye essentially shut in that fight. Takes a good amount of damage in that. Delija still rains out blows to finish the fight against Waldo. Fight gets stopped, but it's a timeout. Eye poke. Waldo still comes back in instead of taking a DQ or a no contest. Knocks out Delija immediately after in that same first round. Unbelievable bad man status for Waldo. And then he's already a guy that's accepting fight after fight. He's already a guy being as active as he's been in heavyweight. 5 fights now on the year. 4 wins, 2 first round knockouts. Comes in for this 5th fight on 2 days' notice against Shamil Gaziev, lands 1 hour before the weigh-ins start. Makes weight at the 265-pound limit, actually a pound under instead of 266. Makes championship weight 265. Goes in there and knocks out Shamil Gaziev in the first round cold. Flatlines him. Flatlines Shamil Gaziev. Head bounces off of the canvas. Waldo is a bad man. He pulls off the pirate gimmick, the little eye patch, teasing the Tom Aspinall. Calls out Tom Aspinall as well. He wants to be active. He wants to fight at the end of the year at the UFC Apex card, December 13. Good luck getting a heavyweight to fight him at that point. I refuse to believe a heavyweight's going to be that active. I would not refuse. Honestly, Curtis Blade should take that fight. Curtis Blade should fight Waldo Cortez Acosta if he could. However, you're not going to get a heavyweight to take. I mean, you could barely get anybody to take a fight like that, especially a ranked fighter, let alone a ranked heavyweight, to take a fight on that short notice. 2 weeks notice, 3 weeks notice on December 13 to fight Waldo? No, it's not going to happen. Moving on. Kyoji Horiguchi's legit. Flyweight has another guy that can contend towards the top that's going to be very interesting. That's a good grappler. Striking is improving tremendously, as we saw. He has some good damage that he can implement across the game. The leg kicks were fantastic against Tagir. I do think Tagir is a massive fraud, so I'm not going to say that Kyoji Horiguchi is better than Tatsuro Taira, that he's better than Josh Van, that he's better than Pantoja, but I think he can compete. I do think he can compete. I think Kyoji looked fantastic against Tagir. I think he looked sharp. 35 years old. You'd think he's a lot younger, to be honest, considering how he looked, especially a 125-pound 35-year-old. You don't really see them being that great. However, at the same time, we have a 35-year-old champion at 125 pounds. I guess the age thing doesn't necessarily matter for the all-time greats. Kyoji Horiguchi, not necessarily an all-time great, but I mean, he looked fantastic against Tagir Ulanbekov. Fantastic high kick, beautiful stuff on the mat. Ends up submitting Tagir out cold. Tagir is from Dagestan. I was actually wondering whether or not he's going to be tapping, because that's essentially a cardinal sin with the Dagestanis. You don't tap, you go out. Exactly what Tagir did. He went out with honor at that point. Unlucky. Makhachev was in his corner, by the way. Devastated. That didn't look great. I mean, Makhachev goes from winning to end up watching his boy get completely choked out cold. Not the best of stuff for the Dagestanis, or the Russians in general, honestly. This card, Gaziev going out cold, or Gaziev's from Bahrain. Specifically Ulanbekov, to be honest. He had the guy losing to Yakhyayev, was losing to Nicholas Dalby. It wasn't the greatest card for Russians. But fantastic stuff from Kyoji Horiguchi. Calls out Pantoja. Not going to get that fight. The winner of Moreno versus Tatsuro Taira is going to be getting the winner of Pantoja versus Joshua Van. We'll see what happens with maybe like Manel Kopp and Royval. I feel like there's a lot of moving pieces. There are a lot of moving pieces at flyweight that we could start working towards building a number one contender, a title challenge. It's very interesting what flyweight's going to be doing, because if Manel Kopp beats Brandon Royval, especially if he knocks him out, how do you take away a title shot from Manel Kopp? But then at the same time, if Royval beats Kopp, now you have Kyoji. You'd rather have Kyoji up there. Do you do Kyoji versus Royval? I feel like that's the smart thing to do from that point. Tatsuro Taira versus Brandon Moreno, 100% up next. Kyoji Horiguchi, they're knocking on the door. And last but not least, Ilia Topuria is a future UFC champion. It's a non-negotiable. This guy, in my opinion, right now is at the bare minimum, a top 4 bantamweight in the world. I say top 5 non-negotiable. Top 4, in my opinion, is bare minimum. You could even say top 3 if you think he's better than either Merab, Umar, or Peter Yan. I think this guy's unbelievable. I think he's very measured. I think he's a little bit more calm in the octagon than Topuria is. I don't think he has the greatest left than his brother Ilia Topuria. I don't think his left hook is the sharpest. I think his right hand is beautiful. I think his jab is gorgeous. The constant forward pressure that he implemented throughout this fight against, in my opinion, Beksa Almakhan, a guy who is better than a majority of top 15 bantamweights right now, especially defensively in the grappling. The positions that Alexandre had him in, I refuse to believe a lot of other flyweights would get out of that position that Alexandre had Beksa in that mount. Beautiful how he got into that mount. I refuse to believe anybody scrambles out of it the way Beksa was able to. There's so many top 15 bantamweights that could not compete with Beksa Almakhan. Alexandre Topuria looked fantastic. I think he looked sharp. The guy's 29 years old. He's the older brother of Ilia Topuria, by the way. This is his big brother at 135 pounds, 20 pounds lighter. Nonetheless, jab looked beautiful, better and better and better as the fight went on. His grappling, his boxing, the power. He hurt Beksa big time in round 3. Started reading it early. This guy in a 5-rounder is an absolute nightmare. I could only imagine how Alexandre would look in a 5-rounder. It'd be a devastating matchup for almost anybody at bantamweight. I think he beats Sean O'Malley right now. I think he beats the life out of Corey Sandhagen right now. Alexandre Topuria is legit. If you don't want to accept it now, you're just going to have to accept it a little bit later. People love playing the, it's too soon game. It's too early to tell. He only beat this guy. Beksa Almakhan, 100% right now, is at least a top 7 bantamweight. And I guarantee you, when you look later on, within the next year or so, this guy's going to be showcased as that. He's only 1-2 in the UFC. He came into the UFC on short notice, fighting under Magomedov, and comes out of the UFC, or not comes out of the UFC, has his 3rd fight right now against Topuria. Not necessarily the easiest of schedules for Beksa Almakhan to come into the UFC. This guy's legit. Topuria made him look less than he is. This is a legit contender. This is a guy who's going to be champion eventually. I think post-Marab is Alexandre Topuria. Now, a couple must-see matchups next. This is all we're going to do for this video right now. We'll have a couple other YouTube videos spaced out, but I want to talk to you guys about 3 must-see matchups we need next. I am going to put a contingency on one of them, though. Gary versus Morales. I just broke down earlier what I think should happen, and I will go against what I have on this graphic here. But the must-see matchups. Ilia Topuria versus Arman Tsarukyan at some point has to happen. Tsarukyan is next in line for the lightweight title. You cannot justify another lightweight getting a championship fight over Arman Tsarukyan. But at the same time, you have Ilia Topuria versus Makhachev as a possibility. I'm going to play devil's advocate on this concept of Makhachev and Topuria happening and say, let's say we're going to do Topuria versus Tsarukyan as Topuria's first title defense at lightweight. Then we have welterweight open up. Now, instead of doing what I have down there in Morales versus Gary, you would have Michael Morales versus Islam Makhachev. You would do Ian Gary versus Shavkat Rakhmonov too. That's the fight to make. Then you would do at welterweight Bilal Muhammad versus Kamaru Usman. These conversations about Kamaru Usman fighting for the title in 2025 are hysterical. He's 1-3 in his last 4. If you want to isolate the short notice matchup against Khamzat Chimaev, he is 1-2 in his last 3 at welterweight. He beat Joaquin Buckley, who's, I think he was like number 6 or 7 at the time. I can't remember exactly. And Buckley isn't necessarily the most impressive win in the world right now, let alone considering what has happened at welterweight and who is at the top of welterweight. Kamaru Usman, if my memory recalls correctly, is ranked like number 7 or 8 in welterweight right now. I'm going to double check. To be fair, my app is not updated, but no, it is. He's ranked number 8 at welterweight right now, behind Sean Brady, Ian Gary, and that's before Ian Gary gets moved up after this card in 2 days. Carlos Prates, Shavkat Rakhmonov, Michael Morales, Bilal Muhammad, and Jack Della Maddalena. I would say the only person that Kamaru Usman has any sort of justification in fighting for a title above anybody on this list is nobody. There is nobody. I would take Sean Brady and Bilal Muhammad coming off of losses over Kamaru Usman to fight for the title next. Screw the name. Screw what he was before. Kamaru Usman's name now and credibility now is not Kamaru Usman's name and credibility back in 2021 or 2023. It's not the same guy. This is or 2022, whatever it is. It's not the same guy. It is not the same guy. This is not Kamaru Usman of 2021. We're not talking about the number 1 guy. We're not talking about the 15 win streak Kamaru Usman. We're talking about a guy who's 1-3 in his last 4, 1-2 in his last 3 at welterweight. Let him fight a guy at welterweight, Bilal Muhammad or Jack Della Maddalena. You have to give him something that makes a little bit more sense. Screw this little garbage. Stop making these conversations with Kamaru Usman fighting for the title. You have a grudge match, make him versus Bilal. Morales versus Shafkat, Morales versus Makhachev, Gary versus Shafkat, Pratas versus JDM, and then you do Topuria versus Arman Tsarukyan. That is all for the video. We'll post a couple more later on in the week. Thank you guys so much for watching. Like and subscribe. Make sure you comment if you have any comments you want to leave below. And also, go follow the TikTok at MMA_DBM. Appreciate you guys all for watching. I will see you guys later in the day or tomorrow. Peace out.